Support for this program comes from Jazz on the Tube, the internet's largest collection of free streamable classic jazz videos. From Miles Davis to Louis Armstrong, from Thelonious Monk to Duke Ellington. You'll find it all on jazzonthetube.com. Start your free subscription today.
Hi, and welcome to Jazz Talk, a Jazz on the Tube podcast. My name is Ken McCarthy, and this is where we talk with people who are doing important work that supports and illuminates the music we love. The writers, the scholars, the educators, the filmmakers, the producers, and more.
Hey, everybody, we got a really special guest today. I want to show you his book right away. How's that for a provocative title? He covers it all, music and life. And his name is Mike Vaccaro. Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
And, you know, on Jazz on the Tube, we're usually listening to and looking at music, and that's how most music fans experience music. Some of us who think a little bit more about it, we might try to study the history. We might even try to learn some music theory and do some things on the piano. But very few of us think about the professional side of music, like, how do these guys do it? How do these guys make it to the stage? You know, we see them on the stage, and in a way, that's the way it should be. It is show business, and we want to be entertained, and that makes perfect sense. But I know some of our listeners want to go deeper. And I know some of our listeners are student musicians. I know some of our listeners are educators. I know some of our musicians are professional musicians, some fledgling, some already fully employed. And what's so cool about this book is that it talks about both sides. The art.
That's what I tried to do.
You did it. You did it.
Yeah.
And this is tricky. I'm trying to remember of any book that I know that covers the art of music and the nuts and bolts business of music in the same volume and integrates it together. I really don't know one. So let me just tell you who this book is for. If you are you call them a woodwind, right?
Woodwinds, yeah.
Woodwinds,
Reed
right?
players, yeah. Woodwinds, that's all. It's all fine.
Gotcha. So, but of course, flute players don't have reeds. So, and they're not.
I've never been able to explain that.
Okay. Well, but anyway, they know what I'm talking about. So, guys,
Yeah.
if you're a woodwind student, I mean, this book, as absolutely, you must have it. If you are the librarian of a conservatory or any school that has any kind of a music program at all, this book has to be in your library. Okay, everybody see it? You just have to have it. Now, if you're a professional, you're going to love this book because you're going to recognize a lot of things in it that you already know, and you're going to learn a few tricks of the trade that you might not know yet that are going to change your life. So, Mike, I wonder if you could, for people that don't know you, could you talk about your life in music? Now, I know we only have an hour, so think about, a 2-minute survey of your vast experience in music, which is pretty vast.
Well, from the very time I started, I always found out what I needed to learn, and then I learned it. It was never like, okay, I'm going to be a jazz player, and this is what I need to do it. It was like, okay, I've hired you for this, now do it. And then I have to go out and run out and learn how to do it. And I worked hard. I've always practiced harder than anybody else because that's just what I had to do. I mean, they're naturals in this field, but I'm not a natural, I'm a learner. So, when I first went with the Kenton band, I didn't play a note of jazz. I had never played a baritone sax in my life. They bought a baritone sax for me. And so I had to learn everything on the first tour, and which I did. I stayed in my room and I practiced.
Wow. So let me just make sure everybody catch this. So we're talking about the Stan Kenton band, which was one of the great big bands of jazz history.
Right.
And they handed you a horn.
It happened that I was going to school at Cerritos College, And
Okay.
Cerritos College had a thing called the Collegiate Neophonic that Stan had kind of put together with the school teachers. And it was like all the best players in LA. And and there was two bands and we went, different places and played. And when Bill Fritz, who was a baritone player on the band at the time that I was doing the Stan Kenton band, the Stan Kenton Clinic, uh, decided that he wanted to retire and go teach, he asked me if I wanted to take his place. I said, well, of course, And by then I just gotten done playing the Scaramouche for alto saxophone and orchestra, which was by Darius Milhaud, a famous, a classical composer. And, we had a little jazz band at the college, but, I mean, I don't know if I was ready for the Kenton band or not, but I went, and I learned how to do it.
So it's kind of like you were playing sandlot baseball, or maybe league baseball, like intramural or baseball, and then the Yankees said, "Hey, we got a place in the outfield. You want to come and join us, right?"
Very, very good. Yes, that's true.
And that's kind of how music works. That's kind of how all businesses work sometimes. Someday the guy that you were counting on has announced that he's leaving, and suddenly you need somebody. And there's a guy that can breathe. Let's hope he rise to the occasion.
Well, I did a little more than breathe, but I was technically pretty good. In fact, one of the big surprises for me is we were on the plane, and in school you take 3 tunes and you play them all year long, right? So we're on the plane, and I'm sitting next to another new guy. No, I'm not. I was sitting next to an older guy, and I said, "Well, when we get there, when do we rehearse?" He said, "Man, we don't rehearse."
Wow!
And I was like, "Oh, so this is what being a professional is," So I learned, but fortunately, I read better than any of them. None of them could read, and I was a real good reader because I'd learned clarinet from the beginning, saxophone from the beginning, flute from the beginning, and I had yet to learn oboe from the beginning. But I learned 3 instruments from the beginning, and every time you learn from the beginning, you got to go through the very beginning books, the whole notes, the half notes, the quarter notes, the eighth notes, the 16th notes, the 32nd notes. So I gained a lot of fingers by doing that, by learning 3 different instruments.
Gotcha.
So I was ahead of the game that way.
Gotcha. So you had chops.
I had chops, but no taste.
No, not yet. So how often does it happen in the music industry where someone says, "Hey, can you do this?" And a proficient musician will say, "Yeah," and then he'll spend the next week learning how to do this thing that he just agreed to be able to do that he's never done before. Is that common, uncommon? Does that happen?
Well, in the current music business, that's not very common because everybody plays so good anymore. Everybody plays so much better than I did at their age. When we had the pandemic, a lot of people left LA that were in their early 60s, and they just figured, well, I made so much money and my special payments funds are so good that I can go wherever I want. So they just left. And so all these young people came in and they were ready. They were ready to play. I mean, there were still some of the older guys and girls that were playing first chair just till, but then they would, leave, and next person would take over, and it was always fun because the kids now are better than ever. The ones that really want to play. I mean, you know that with jazz players. I mean, in LA, there's 50 jazz players you never heard of that have so many chops that, I can't even, begin to tell you how good they are.
Wow. Someday maybe we'll have a special call on that. And you might get Scott Yanoff on the phone because he does a lot of reviewing of the LA scene. Because we love to highlight. Everyone knows New York's the Big Apple, and people know about New Orleans, and some people are aware LA's a good jazz scene, but I don't think they realize how deep and how great the scene actually is. The player,
it really is, yeah.
So if a young person, since this has come up, if a young person is aspiring to be a professional these days, they need to know that I want to use the phrase winner take all. In other words, you got to be one of the best of the best. It's not an easy thing to slip into.
It's not like when I came up. No, not at all.
Gotcha.
I mean, I remember the first job that I worked, and those were in the days where your teacher could get you jobs. And my teacher got me jobs, and he got me this job at a place called the Pageant of the Masters. And, like one of the guys was a boat salesman, and he was playing second chair, and he was okay, but, no more. I mean, they audition and they have 50 people that play great, so it's really changed.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now you have speaking of that, of how you get there in terms of skill, you have a very provocative statement on the back of your book, which says you only need to study music for 1 minute a day.
Absolutely.
Now, please, maestro, tell us what on earth are you talking about? It can't possibly be true.
Well, it is true. All you have to do is get the instrument out, sit for a minute in the quiet, let go of all the things that are pulling on you. And we all have things pulling on us, and say, okay, this is my hour, or my 15 minutes, or my 1 minute of silence and practice. And what happens is if you play 1 minute and you're interested, you can't play 1 minute.
Okay, got it.
You just can't do it, And so if you find yourself trying to practice 1 minute for a year and you can't do it, give it up.
There you go.
So you should be doing something else. But if you pick it up and you play for 1 minute, you say, "Oh man, this is great. What more can I learn?" Then all of a sudden you're practicing 2 or 3 hours.
Gotcha.
And my wife constantly reminds me if I don't practice today. The next day she says, "You got to practice today?" I said, "Yeah, 1 minute." And then I usually get 2 or 3 hours in, because I'm interested.
Gotcha.
So I'm 76 years old. There's no reason that I have to practice. I mean, I do my CDs, and that's basically what I do, and write a book.
Yeah.
So I don't really have to do that, but it's kind of like I'm so used to doing it. If I don't do it, I feel like something's wrong in my life.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I want to just tell you a story that just comes to mind. Dexter Gordon's widow told me this story that he was they were on a cruise somewhere, and somebody invited him to play, and you think, well, Dexter Gordon, he's just going to open up the case and just go to it. No, he went to his room and spent a couple of days getting ready for this sort of informal, impromptu thing, because that was his discipline.
Yeah.
So since we're talking, and so the practice 1 minute a day is kind of like eating a potato chip. Once you open that bag and eat the first one, right?
I bet you can't just eat one.
Exactly. So what you're saying is don't let the sun go down where you haven't picked up your instrument for 1 minute.
Yeah, exactly. And I, it doesn't have to be 7 days a week. It could be 6 days a week. It could be 5 days a week. But the point is that it's regular. And that determines whether you're really interested or not. If you can do it on a regular basis, despite what's going on around you, and we all have things around us that, are pulling on us. It might be our parents, it might be a job, it might be your wife, it might be your sister, it might be your brother, who knows what it is, a baseball game. I don't know. We all have things that are pulling on us, but you just sit there and open the case, look at the horn and put it in your hands. And then, as soon as you do that.
Gotcha. Now it sounds like you get a lot of joy from practicing. Like it's not, I'm sure there's certain things you work on that, wow, this is just work because I got to figure this thing out and it's hard. But I have a feeling that practicing is a joy for you. And I imagine, and now I'm just in the realm of imagination, I may be 100% wrong, but I imagine the only way you're going to get to be a great musician is if you find a way to fully enjoy the practice process.
Right. And I didn't in the beginning, but I didn't really realize that the joy is in the work. Because when you sit down to practice, you don't practice what you know. At least you shouldn't. You should practice what you don't know. And that's why I don't know if you read the whole book through yet, but one of the things I say is teachers have to play for their students so they know how to practice. They have to play something they cannot play. And we all have things we can't play. Jascha Heifetz had stuff he couldn't play. John Coltrane used to have stuff he didn't play. That's why he practiced 24 hours a day. His mother said he'd practice at the dinner table.
Wow.
So we're practicing stuff we don't know, and that's what you have to learn to love, is to get better at something that you don't know.
Okay.
And the way to do it, and I keep saying this, and nobody wants to do it this way, especially young people, you got to do it slow. So if there's something you can't play, if you can't see it, you can't play it. So if you go over it enough times slow, you see it. And then it becomes part of your fingers, because you're just looking and moving your fingers. You're not thinking about, okay, what is this hard thing that I have to do that doesn't feel right, And that's the joy, is when you finally can go, oh man, I can play that any tempo I want. Uh, so I didn't realize that when I was young, because I didn't like working. I had baseball to do, and I was chasing girls, and all the stuff you do when you're young. And so by the time I got into like 2 years before college, I thought, oh, I better get serious. So I started practicing. I still didn't really like it, but I knew I had to do it, because I knew I was going to be a musician. I knew when I was 14 years old.
Okay.
I went to hear Count Basie's band at Disneyland, sat in the front row. Marshall Royal played, and I said, that's what I'm going to do for a living. And that's what I did for a living.
Wow.
And I think it's very helpful to know what you want to do that young in life.
Well, especially in music, because the standards are so high, and there's so many, when you're in that field, there will be somebody who's been working at it on a serious level since they were 10 or younger.
Or 3.
Or 3.
Yeah. And then usually they start off with piano, which is really important. I say in the book too, like if you're 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you want to sing and play the piano first. So, you don't have to do it. You can play Mary Had a Little Lamb chord with the left hand, melody with the right hand. It's just getting used to something that you can see, and then singing along with it, because those are the 2 most important things, is how you sing through your instrument. Mm-hmm. So if you can sing with your voice, you can sing with your instrument.
Well, I want to go on a sidebar related to this. I've had a chance to talk with a lot of senior statesmen in music. One fellow, when I talked with him, he was 90 in Cuba. Another guy was 104. Still gigging. I mean, didn't play long pieces, but he would solo.
Sure.
Both of them, in the era that they grew up in, were taught solfege, the do, re, mi,
right,
sight reading. As boys, they were not allowed to even touch an instrument until they mastered sight reading.
That's the European way.
Okay.
That's what they do in Europe. I think they still do that in Europe. And I think it's very valuable. And I think it's something we miss. We throw 20 kids into a room with a teacher that might be a trumpet player, and he's trying to teach you clarinet, and there's no way that he can help you, so you have to have a private teacher, and most kids don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're behind the 8 ball before we even start, because the education is wrong. We should do exactly what you said. The first year should be solfege and singing.
Well, there's a fellow, Vic Hobson. He's a bass player and from England, and he's written 2 books on Louis Armstrong, and he's done some sort of archaeology, of Armstrong's life. And they did sight singing in the New Orleans public schools when Armstrong was a boy. Every day, I even had the book. I went out and bought it, the original, and they would sing a tune, and they had the music in front of them, and he had years and years of that under his belt. So, because there's always that mystery of, how did he get so good so fast, so young? Well, he'd had that foundation of singing.
Yeah, it's really so important, and I never had that. And I never had I never learned how to play the piano. I would still like to learn how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. I guess I'm going to have to learn someday. But I think those are really important instruments, especially when a child's so small that they really can't hold an instrument.
Right.
But you can sing.
Yeah.
You can we have keyboards now with real small keys. You could play a chord with your left hand, play a melody with your right hand, and then you see the notes. So many kids, the chromatic scale is the alphabet of music.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can all say A, B, C, D, F, G. We can do that really quick. But most kids can't play the chromatic scale because they don't understand half steps. Why is that a half step if it's from one note to another note? Why is that a full step? They're going to argue with you about that. Well, there's white keys and there's black keys, and you see, these are all half steps. They don't get it. But as soon as you're on a piano and you go da 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 da, I sang that pretty well.
Yeah, not bad. You have a future.
Yeah. As soon as you can do that, you see and you hear at the same time. And that's a really strong thing in your mind when you can do both. On a clarinet, you can't see and do it at the same time. Flute, you can't see it and do it on the same time,
Well,
so,
go ahead.
Really helpful. That's all.
I know that Dizzy Gillespie could get himself around a keyboard. I know Miles Davis could. I even saw Ornette Coleman on a piano. He wasn't great, but he knew what it was.
No, you don't have to be great. That's the point. Yeah. You just have to, be willing to mess with it. It's like the 1 minute a day. You just go sit down and see what happens.
There you go. And then I
have a friend of mine, and I thought he had perfect pitch. I said, "Do you have perfect pitch?" He says, "No, but I have pretty good relative pitch." He could hear anything. I mean, once he played one note, he had the whole thing. Rusty Higgins, incredible jazz player. He was Tony Tennille's music director for a long time, and when she had her TV show, she'd feature him, and it was fabulous. He's another guy you've never heard of that is fabulous. And I've tried to talk him into doing a CD, and he doesn't want to do it.
Let's talk about that just briefly. Fans need to know that when you see a star, you're seeing the tip of an iceberg. And of course, there's the sidemen, but then there's all these other musicians who you just may never learn the name of, who can just play their asses off. And don't think, well, I only want to go see the name brand guy. If you go see everything that you can, because you will get stunned, and it's fun to be stunned by somebody that you didn't see coming.
Yeah, even a high school band and that soloist steps out and you go like, wow, where did he come from?
Yeah. It's a thrill. It's really a thrill. So
yeah,
don't feel that you have to only go with name brand musicians.
Absolutely.
One last thing about the keyboard, and then we'll move on. There's a fellow named David Amram who you may or not heard of. He's like, I think he's 93 now. He's famous for actually he and Jack Kerouac invented the jazz with poetry reading and bongo thing they really did invent it.
I was at the end of that.
Yeah, somebody had to invent it, right? And it was them. And he played French horn. He actually played French horn briefly in the Mingus workshop, that Mingus jazz, Mingus, right? But he knew Monk, he knew Charlie Parker, he knew all these guys. And anyway, about the visual, Monk sat down with him and said, "Look, it's all laid out on the keyboard. It's not just hearing, it's looking too." So we've spent quite a bit of time on this idea, but I do think I think you're so right. Whatever instrument you're playing, get a little $100 keyboard and make sure you know how to play your major triads, and they're not hard to learn. And yeah,
I would say if up to 6th grade, even if you're playing another instrument, you should be playing piano and singing.
And you made this point, not piano to make it into the conservatory, but piano to know your way around the keyboard, right? We're not talking about perfection.
I took piano for 6 semesters in college. I did 4 semesters in junior college, and I didn't pass the test in the 4-year college, so I had to do 2 semesters again. And I never learned anything because the only thing that they assigned me was Für Elise. And, teach me Happy Birthday, teach me the Star Spangled Banner, teach me something that helps me. I'm never going to play Für Elise, and I don't want to play it,
Right. And you don't necessarily learn anything from, someone gives you a score and they tell you where to put your fingers, and then you figure out how to put your fingers, then you memorize it. I mean, that's nice. It breaks the ice, but you're not learning the structure of music that way. And you got to learn it explicitly.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't know how they do it at Berkeley, but I hope that that's how they do it at Berkeley when they have a piano class, Okay, here's some chord changes, learn them.
Hey, another crazy sidebar, but I want to remind everybody we're talking about this amazing book, all right? Music and Life. And again, that's a pretty ballsy title to put on a book, right?
That's what I do.
The book delivers. I'm going to tell you, the book delivers. There was a wonderful woman in New Orleans named Yvonne Bush, and she was a super professional musician, toured and everything. But she also taught in the public schools. And and in the public schools, they only taught classical music. In fact, for a while, believe it or not, jazz, this was in the early days, like the 20s, jazz was banned. You weren't allowed to teach jazz even in New Orleans because it was considered a raucous music. But then that softened a little bit. But what she would do when she was teaching classical music, she would also add the chord changes. So that the guys that were into jazz could understand, okay, I get it. I get what Chopin is doing here. It's 5-1. Okay,
That's great. That's really great.
Hey, speaking of we're talking about theory. How important is theory? Of course, for jazz musicians, you've got to know theory, but for musicians in general, how important is it to learn, the fundamental theory of music, as well as learning your instrument and learning how to read?
Oh, I think it's really important. I mean, because then you know why a note goes to another note. Why a 7 goes to a 3 and a 3 goes to a 5, and because there's normal resolutions to notes, and you have to understand those normal resolutions. When I went we had a jazz band when I was in high school, but nobody played jazz. We just played jazz tunes.
Okay.
And then when I went to college, it was like a conservatory kind of a thing. Nobody knew what jazz was. I mean, it was a dirty word. So we would rehearse at 5 o'clock between the daytime classes and the nighttime classes. We had a jazz band. Well, finally, we won a contest, so they had to pay attention to us. They started a little commercial music program, which grew to a very big one. But I mean, in 60, this was a 67. It was still taboo to play jazz.
Really?
In a conservatory kind of a setting. Even what's a big school in New York?
Let's see, the Manus.
Any of them. They all have a commercial or jazz program of some kind.
Now they do.
Now they do, yeah. But I mean, in '66, man, nobody did.
I wonder when, North Texas State or North Texas was a super pioneer really early.
Right.
Berkeley was really early. I think even New England Conservatory, because of that fellow that used to write all those great books. But you're right. I remember.
Yeah. He wrote for Stan a little bit. In fact, we did the first jazz concert there ever done. And all the professors were sitting there. And you know how loud that band was. It was really loud. And they were like aghast.
Gunther Schuller? It's Gunther Schuller. Is that the name? Gunther.
Yeah. Gunther. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember this would have been early 80s. A friend of mine announced to me that he'd gotten a job as a faculty member at the jazz department at the New School, New School was kind of a university in New York City. And I was shocked. I'm like, what? They're giving professor jobs to jazz musicians? So now there's hundreds of jazz programs, I guess. And actually, I don't know if you've thought about this, but let me put you on the spot. If someone, and of course, we want to talk about the fact that you're covering a lot of stuff in your life and in this book. You don't just play only jazz, classical, commercial, Hollywood stuff, TV stuff. I mean, you're doing everything. But let's focus on jazz for a second. Young person, they think that it would be a good idea to be in a jazz program. How do they pick one? What are the criteria? We won't name particular schools, but what criteria would you look for if you were starting over and you decided you were going to go that route?
Well, I mean, you're talking at college level picking?
College level, yeah.
I would go to the school and take a lesson from this private teacher, and I would sit in on some classes, and I go to 4 or 5 places to do it.
Gotcha.
I mean, because you just can't do it intellectually. You got to go there. If you're going to have a teacher, you better like that guy or girl. I mean. So I'm a big fan of I had an oboe student, and he's at Yale now, but he always auditioned his teachers. I mean, his dad, who's a music director at a high school near here, took him, all over the Midwest and the East Coast, and he just went and took a lesson with every teacher, and to find out who he liked. And he ended up at UCLA for his bachelor's. And then he's got his master's at Yale, and now he's like getting his doctorate at Yale. And fortunately, Yale is very good about having their students go play with professional orchestras. They'll let them out of class to play with a professional orchestra. So my former student comes here to California from the East Coast, from Connecticut, to play with the Riverside Symphony 4 to 5 times a year.
Oh, and he's an oboist.
Yeah. So and a good jazz tenor player, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I told him, I said, never let anybody know you play the tenor.
So, but his living is from the classical world.
It's going to be, yes.
Gotcha.
I don't know whether he's going to be a teacher or a player, but he is totally qualified to be a player.
So because this raises a really interesting issue, because some people say, well, we got to go to Juilliard, we got to go to Curtis, or apparently there's a great school in LA, a little small school that's specifically.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm old. I don't remember names well.
Yeah. We know what it is. We'll look it up and figure it out later.
Yeah.
But again, it's sort of a name brand situation where people think, well, if I could just go to Harvard, then the doors will open for me. Well, maybe Harvard's in sync with you and you're in sync with Harvard, and that's the place to be. But maybe Clemson State, maybe, who knows? But so
the problem with classical music is they're putting out orchestra clones, all of those places. They probably put out 4 or 5 orchestra qualified clarinet players a year, 4 or 5 flute players, 4 or 5 oboe players. Problem is there's only 10 full-time orchestras in the United States.
Okay.
And most of those people keep their jobs 40 or 50 years.
Okay.
And so how do you get in? So there's really not a place for them. And it's very sad. And in a way, that same thing is true of jazz, because I don't remember J.J. Johnson. Somebody said, if you're not Miles Davis or John Coltrane or one of the people that are really making money, all of us fringe people, we have a hard time. We scuffle.
Mm-hmm.
So even at the height of jazz, it was like you say, the names. People want to see the name.
Right.
And that's a difficulty.
So with that as the reality, you in the book, and I want to hold the book up again. In addition to talking about the art of music, and we've talked about practicing and how to practice and why to practice and the importance of singing and all these kinds of things, making a living in music. Let's talk about that. Harder than ever.
Be prepared and be in the right place at the right time. Okay. And hang out with people that are in the business. I mean, if it's a jazz player, go and see a lot of jazz concerts. Let them know who you are. Let everybody in the room know who you are. Just know more, the more people that you're friends with. And I don't mean get me job friends. I mean real friends. Like okay. You would do something if they needed it. You would help them. That kind of a friend. The more people you have like that, and then being in the right place at the right time gives you the best chance of, like me, Bill Fritz says, hey, you want the job?
Right.
Yeah, I do. And, my teacher, he'd say, I can't do this job. You go do this job, So, that's how it's done.
And you were prepared, obviously, for the jobs. But I think there's something else about you is you are versatile. In other words, you didn't say, well, I only want to go down this narrow track and I can't look at anything else. You have a broad scope.
Well, being a doubler or what did you call it?
Woodwind player.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't do anything other than that I was interested in. Anything musical I wanted to know about. If somebody said Beethoven, I said, well, who's Beethoven? Well, to listen to this. So I go listen to that, and it was just my keen interest in it that kept me going, because we all have hard times, I didn't want to work in Vegas for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, luckily I played in the orchestra and I played in Kicks bands till 5 in the morning, and besides the job, but that wasn't fun. I mean, it was lucrative. But so I moved to LA. It got better. The jobs were better.
Gotcha.
So,
So, but
everybody has to pay dues somehow. Most people do.
it's interesting that, and I think that phrase comes from music, actually,
Yeah.
paying dues.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's not all glamour, and even the names, like they didn't get to be names overnight. They did tons of unglamorous things.
Right.
And I think the versatility is really important. Here's a story that'll, I think, bring this home for everybody. Robert Johnson, everybody knows, the blues legend and the guy that integrated all the different blues styles, and everybody, he's the blues man. Well, when Robert Johnson was living, he played any gig he could get, and he traveled quite a bit. He got as far east as Newark, New Jersey, and in Newark, New Jersey, he got a gig playing at an Italian wedding, playing Tarantellas.
I read that in your book.
Yeah. So
it's true. It's true. You'll do anything.
Yeah. And it's part of the game. It's
Yeah.
part of the game.
I remember that I was working for an agency once, and in California they just put 3 or 4 people together and send them out. They're not bands, they just guys who could play. So we get to this job, and we're all pretty good musicians, and we started playing, and guys come up to me, says, "What are you guys doing?" He says, "I hired a country western band." I said, "Well, we're not a country western band."
Oh my God.
But the guy that sent us didn't know much about music. He just thought a band was a band. You just send out a band.
Wow.
I don't think he ever got paid.
Yeah, that's a whole nother issue, getting paid, right?
Yeah.
So talk about, if you would, the scope of your own music activities, just to give people a sense of how broad the opportunities are if one is, open-minded and prepared and able to shift gears. And I think the new thing in business now is pivot. You got to be able to pivot from one thing to another.
That's a good word.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the various things that you've done over your career musically?
I'll give you a short synopsis, 10 minutes long. Well, I started off in elementary school. I played my first job in 6th grade. I played the theme from Zorro for $1 and a free dinner at the PTA meeting. And that was my first job. And then when I got into high school, of course, I played in the band, and we didn't have an orchestra, but we did have a jazz band, and I played in that. And we won an award. They had a thing here called the Battle of the Bands at the Hollywood Bowl, and we won that.
Oh, wow.
Despite not playing a note of jazz. The solo was written out, so I played the written out solo. And we beat like some really great players from the Valley, and they were aghast that they didn't win. They couldn't believe they wouldn't win, And I got to know all of them since, and they're all great guys, And then I went to college, and again, it was all classical music, and I had a great classical teacher, and then we started the jazz band, and so we did that, and that started the music program, the commercial music program at Cal State Long Beach. Mm-hmm. They have a wonderful program now with a real good jazz player heading it. I forget his name. He's a trumpet player, very good. So after that, I met with this guy Henry Temyanka. He was the orchestra director, and he was actually one of the 4 members of the Paganini String Quartet that all played on Stradivarius guitar, violins, and cellos.
Okay.
And they were together like 30 or 40 years on the road, doing it the hard way. And then he became the teacher at Cal State Long Beach, and he also had a group called the California Symphony, I think, which I went to hear many times. And anyway, it was great to be able to play with a professional that knew the business. Because, all the teachers didn't know the business. They were in a teaching business. So we finally got a teacher that really understood, and he liked to go to the bar after rehearsal and have a beer and talk about it, which was great, And in the meantime, I had been studying with Willie Maiden and Don Rader, they too like to go to the bar to have the jazz lessons. There was a piano at the bar. So we go to the bar and have the piano lessons, which was right across the street from the school.
Oh,
So
okay.
that worked out great. So then after that, I played, Maestro Timianka selected me to play the Scaramouche for alto saxophone and orchestra. And I don't know if you can see in the back there, but there's a little poster up there back there about it.
Okay.
And then immediately after that, I went with the Kenton Band, and I did that for a year without a day off. We worked 364 days, and on the 365th day, we had a day off.
Really?
And we lived on the bus. And I mean, it wasn't a touring bus, it was a Greyhound bus.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it was not pleasant, but
I can't imagine.
we stayed pretty drunk, so
Okay. Okay.
so I did that, and then I got kind of tired of that, and I actually had to take a loan from Stan to get off the band. I said, Stan, I got to have a rest, man, but I gotta have some money to get off the band, which he gave me. And then a few months later, I worked with Woody Herman, and I didn't like that band at all for some reason. He and Woody and I did not click at all. And so I came back to LA and went again with Stan. And then finally, I had enough of the road, and I ended up in Las Vegas.
Gotcha.
Where my teacher at Cal State Long Beach spent most of his life, and he got me a job there at the Folies Bergère.
Oh, okay.
I did that for a year, and then I did 3 years at the Sands with really great acts: Sammy Davis, Lena Horne.
Oh,
Yeah, really,
oh, wow.
really, that part of it was fun. And then I played with the symphony, and nighttime jazz bands after work, after 2 o'clock in the morning, as I explained.
Yeah.
Then I came back to LA, and I just sat around for a year. No work, because nobody knew who I was. And then I got together with this piano player that was an amazing jazz player, and he wanted to learn the classical literature. So we just rehearsed almost every day, 6 hours a day for a year.
Mm.
And after that, we put out our first album, and it was good. And so that was that. And then from there, I did some dinner theater, and then I did some big time Broadway theater, instead of actually the dinner theater was more fun because there were just three of us, so we had to play all the parts. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was much more fun. In fact, we did Oklahoma once, and the arranger only put chord changes on my part. So I had to improvise in the style of Oklahoma, which was not easy.
Wow. Just three of you.
Yeah, just three of us: percussion, keyboard, and woodwinds.
Woodwind.
Woodwinds, yeah. And I played everything I owned. And so from then I went to the Pantages and, the other major theaters. And then about the same time, I was playing with, big bands in Orange County. And then I started doing movies, which was great. And, everybody thinks movies, are like, whoa, what a great job. But, when you're only playing 16 bars at a time, it's really not that much fun. And there's a lot of pressure because you got 85 people there, and there's a lot of money involved, and you got to get it right the first time, or the second time. I mean, if you're waiting for the fourth time to do it right, you won't be asked back.
Yeah.
So I did that for, maybe 10 years, along with some theater work.
Mm-hmm.
And then I retired. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I thought, well, I'll practice. I didn't know what else to do because I didn't like sitting down. I didn't, like watching TV or, I mean, it wasn't interesting to me. So I started practicing. And since I retired, which was 11 years ago, I've probably done 6 CDs.
Yeah.
And, learned a lot, and 3 jazz and 3 classical. I just got done with a Brahms CD. And you have, of course, the last one, Goodbye, which was Benny Goodman's last tune every night.
Yeah.
And, there's some nice playing on that. I got the best jazz rhythm section in LA, man. It was so easy. And nothing was more than 1 or 2 takes. And we were all sight reading. And the guys were just so great. I didn't even have to say, well, you play now and you play now. And everybody just knew when to play. I mean, it was just magic, you know. And so yeah, I like that.
And I imagine with a good rhythm section, you're just floating. You're just
Yeah,
floating. It's like a boat on water, on good water.
we did Somewhere from West Side Story, and I thought, well, you know, a little intro, and then I'll start it. So they played the intro, and then the bass player started playing da 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 da. I went, oh, I guess he's going to play it. So I came in on the bridge, and it sounds so great, you know,
Mm.
and his intonation was flawless, you know. It was just, but nobody talked about what was going to happen. Everybody just did it, you know. It was great.
Tell everybody the name of that album again, how they can get it. Sounds
It's called Goodbye, and you can get it on from me, Mike at MikeVaccaro.com, or you can get it on Bandcamp, MikeVaccaro2 at Bandcamp.com. And that's changing. That's soon going to be Cicerone Music and Art in Italy. They have 30 streaming places that they sell to. And, you know, I don't do anything to promote it. You know, I should, but I don't.
yeah.
I'm more interested in playing it than, you know. So that's another thing, you know. I talk about it in the book a little bit. Every job in music is important. The agent is important. The composer is important. The publicity person's important, because they do things you don't want to do. And it's very hard to sell yourself when somebody else is saying, hey, this guy's the greatest. You got to hire him. You know, I can't say that about myself.
Right.
You know, so everybody around us is important. And especially musicians that don't have a name already are hesitant to use those people because it costs money. But they're the people that you really need, unless you're going to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
When I had that group with that I told you that we practiced so much, my wife was in it too. She's a singer, opera singer. And luckily she did 2 or 3 hours of work to get us something every day. You know, we ended up on the Columbia Artist touring schedule and, you know, went nice places. But if she hadn't have done that, we'd have been sitting rehearsing the rest of our lives, you know.
Wow. So the business side of things absolutely does not take care of itself.
Oh no. Oh no. And it's much better if you can get somebody else to do it for you. If not, you have to do it yourself. You have to.
Gotcha. If it's gonna be your livelihood and your career.
Right.
So we could talk all day, and I would like to, but I want to remind people that this book exists. I love the title, Music and Life. Thoughts on music, phrasing, woodwinds in this modern world. So, you know, as I said at the beginning, if you're a woodwind player, I mean, you have to have this book. You know, a preacher needs a Bible. Your woodwind player needs this book. But I would say any musician needs this book because it has some very insightful things to say about the art of music, but also about the nuts and bolts business side. And maybe we'll end on this point. You're very unlikely to learn this stuff in school.
Oh no, they don't know. They don't have a clue.
Okay.
No, they don't. Unless they've been a professional musician for a while.
And then you have to go to the bar with them after class and buy them drinks.
Oh, darn it, I hate that.
So if you love music and you want it to be your life, you have to remember it's called show business. So,
right.
you know, love the music, do all the musical things you can, but realize there's a music side. Mike's given you some very valuable advices, which there are business savvy people with the right skills who can help you. And those are people you need to meet, get to know, see if you like one. And, you know, when you're ready, be willing to invest in them or do the work yourself.
Well, somebody said a musician constantly fights. Let's see if I can get this right. With wanting to play and wanting to hide. Most of us never think we're good enough, ever. Even great players don't. Dizzy Gillespie once said, he says, I just play the same stuff all the time, man. He says, I wish I could learn something new, you know.
Oh my God, really?
We all feel that way. But
wow.
You know, the difference between a musician and an entertainer is an entertainer doesn't care. They want the audience to love them. We want us to love us.
Oh,
big difference.
wow.
You know, it's hard to love yourself when when music's hard all the time.
Yeah. So I guess that's yet another element of music is if you're a musician versus an entertainer, nothing wrong with being an entertainer, you know,
No,
but if you're a musician and you know you're a musician, there is this psychological thing you have to deal with your whole life. It never goes away, does it?
no,
Okay.
no,
So
never
if you're
goes away.
so if you're struggling with it,
Because because music is so huge.
yeah,
You can't learn it all. Heifetz couldn't play a note of jazz. You missed a whole half of the world. And then you take these ethnic players like these Croatian clarinet players, ridiculous. These guys are unbelievable.
yeah,
So I mean, there's music that we hardly even know about that's going on in this world, you
yeah.
know.
So
Huge.
the beautiful thing is it's endless. You'll never run out of beauty to explore and discover. The hard
Exactly.
thing is you'll always feel like you're behind the eight ball. Uh,
Right.
so you have to
Yeah.
deal with that. And the good thing, I love the story about Dizzy Gillespie. If Dizzy Gillespie thought he was repeating himself, then we know that this is just a problem baked in the cake and none of us should get too worried about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you have licks that work, you're not going to go too far out. Now, Miles wasn't afraid to go out. There's a story about his piano player, the guy that wrote Cantaloupe Island,
Herbie Hancock.
Herbie Hancock.
Yeah.
Herbie was playing with him once, and he said, I played this solo, and it was so bad, and I ended on this terrible note. And he said, I thought I was going to get fired. And he said, Miles started on the bad note and just brought it right back in.
The beauty of jazz, the beauty of jazz.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll leave on that note. I don't think we can improve on that, but this is a wonderful book. Again, for woodwind players, obviously, I'd say for any musician, but I'd also say for fans, if you want to get behind the surface and understand what these great guys are doing and gals are doing behind the scenes to get to the stage, you'll get some beautiful insight in this book. It's a very rare book because it covers the art of music and the business of music and the glories of it and the harsh realities of it, the underbelly of it that you have to deal with. So Mike, thank you so much. Great book. Great.
Thank you. I just want to say that it's available on Amazon.
Yes.
And I don't know where else after this, but right now it's on Amazon. And thanks very much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Me too.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, please share it. That's how we grow. And remember to subscribe to jazzonthetube.com, the internet's largest collection of free, streamable, classic jazz videos.